Hi everybody, we're going to start out with the Zang bridge tutorial. This is an image I took from a culvert. So on the left here we've got the Zang bridge as it's coming out of downtown Dallas, and then on the other side you've got the bridge heading in. And I thought it created some great leading lines. There was enough water in this drainage ditch to give a little bit of a reflection, just enough to kind of make it cool. So I had posted this image on, I think, Facebook, and I don't know if it went to Instagram. But it got a lot of interest, and I thought I would take you through, where I started from and how I wound up with the image that I shared. So a couple of things to maybe take a look at. One is the image itself. It's pretty bright. I shot it at ISO 64, and I did that. Obviously, I wanted to get as much detail as possible. I had plenty of light to do it. I'm at 31 millimeters. Could have been a little wider, but for composition purposes, this was probably the view I wanted, and I wanted to try to get as much of it as possible without having to crop later. F8, plenty of depth of field. Wanted to get everything as sharp as possible, 1/60th of a second. You'll notice that I'm way off to the right here. There is a concept called exposed to the right, if you're not familiar with it, ETTR. The more information you get in an image, in a capture, the better off you are. You can always kind of take away some light, but it's hard later to add it without also adding noise and artifacts. In this case, I've got these boxes up here are clip indicators. They show you when you're too white or too dark. In this case, I think I could probably add about another stop, and then I start getting the red indicators that in those particular locations, the sky or wherever it is completely blown out. There's no data there anymore. Essentially, it's just white. And then you can go the other direction, and I think I've got about a stop or so, and I start seeing a little bit of blue here, which indicates that in those areas, the data is basically missing. It's just black. So where I'm at is fine. I'm kind of right in that sweet spot. And the first thing that I'm going to do, I've got the chromatic aberration on, obviously, enable profile corrections. I do this with wider lenses. You can do it with just about all of them. One tip that I would add in here is that if you enable the profile corrections when you're shooting at a high ISO, you're going to get vignetting in the corners that's very grainy and magenta. So even if you're shooting at 14 and you're shooting at 3200 ISO, shooting a night sky, you'll get a lot of magenta in your corners. So most of the time this is a good idea, just to reduce a little distortion, make it easier on the image to look a little more natural, but it doesn't always work. So the other thing, Lightroom has a spot removal tool, and I imagine most of you are familiar with it. When you click, what it does is it goes and hunts around that area and looks for something similar to copy there, basically. And although that works for, if this was the only spot I had to remove, probably great. That's what I'd use. But because I know I want to go in and clean this up a lot, and this is a personal choice. Some people may want to illustrate all the trash and debris, etc., that is in this area. But for me, it wasn't about that. It was about eliminating distractions and moving toward the resulting composition of these leading lines, this mirrored reflection with the city of Dallas there. And so I want to remove a lot of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this over into Photoshop, because what I've learned through experience is that Photoshop's healing brush tool, spot healing tool, and I'll show you when we get there, is just much more effective. And as I said, it's a personal choice about how much you want to remove and whether you need to go in there or not. Most of the editing that I'm going to do on this image is all going to take place in Lightroom. The reason I'm going to Photoshop is simply to do the cleanup that I want to do. So we're going to hit Control E, and now we're coming over into Photoshop. Okay, here we are in Photoshop, and so up here in the upper left is the healing brush tool that I was talking about, spot healing brush tool. So what happens here is that Photoshop actually takes and just samples the area that's right around the spot that was selected, and uses, up here in the top you can see it says content aware, uses that as a way to replace that spot. And I usually find that it's more accurate, but primarily it's because it's faster, in my opinion. I'm going to go in and do some cleanup here. Usually what I'll do is take and I'll zoom in a little bit, and we'll go into this area here. Eventually I'll go through the whole image and just take a look and see if there's anything I want to get rid of. But one thing, I mean, this thing is so good at what it does. I mean, you can see how that just disappeared. And if you didn't know it had been there, you would never know that it was there. And so I'm gonna run through this. One thing that I'll point out, and this again goes back to probably personal preferences, in the water, especially down toward the front here. Let me zoom back out a little bit so we get a little bit more. You can see that there are, there's a lot of stuff on the water, whether it be bubbles or pollen or leaves or whatever it is. And if you really zoom out and look at the entire image, it's not really that noticeable. However, since I know what I'm wanting to do with this, which is have the ability to print it really large, and with this being right here in the foreground, this will wind up being a distraction. And so I'm going to spend some time on there. I'm not going to make you follow all the way through all of that. I'll move through quickly and speed it up in video so you don't have to watch it all. But I'm going to spend a fair amount of time cleaning this up, just so that in the end it doesn't wind up being something that is a distraction from the focal point of the image. The other thing about it too is that because of these clouds that are reflected in here, they would hide a lot of variances and little spots and things that are in the water. But again, it goes back to what my desire for this image is. And again, your personal preferences editing it may be completely different. You may not care about it. You may want that to show that the water isn't clean, it isn't pure, it isn't perfect in some respects. So I'm going to work my way through the rest of this image. We'll see what the final version looks like as we take it back over into Lightroom. Okay, we're back over in Lightroom, and this was the image that we exported into Photoshop for editing. And after going through and doing my spot removal over there, this is what we wound up with. So you can see we can go back and forth a little bit. Fairly substantial difference, particularly the trash on both shores. That really cleaned up a lot. And so those are just no longer distracting elements in the image itself. If we zoom in on the water area here, we can see all the debris that was there. And now we can see that it's much clearer. So there's still a spot there, and as I've mentioned before, I mean, if I want to, I can use the spot removal tool here inside Lightroom in that one area, and that's fine. It'll take care of it. Because what we want to really get to here is the other basic edits that I go through. Now the image is still pretty bright, as we discussed before, and many times I start off with, before I start adjusting lights and darks, my purpose here was to get a very sharp, crunchy, lot of texture in the image. And so I run the clarity all the way up. And it does a couple things. One is it makes the darks a little darker. The lights can be a little lighter. And so now I'm adjusting from a point of, this is kind of, where what I want the image to feel like. Another thing that happens, you can see, is that the color saturation tends to kind of go down a little bit. So I'll typically add some vibrance. Typically I don't add a lot of saturation. That's probably overkill, but I will add some vibrance back just to get some more of that color back in there. And then I want to look and say, what am I happy with here? What am I unhappy with? And what I'm really happy with is the way these clouds look in this reflection. Now I want to try to get something similar up here in the sky. And a tool that I use a lot is this graduated filter. And one of the things I like about it is I can determine where are the areas that I want to impact, and usually this is dealing with skies. So I'll kind of cover the area that I want to really impact, and now I can go in over here and I can drag down my exposure. I could add more clarity. I can use the dehaze tool. All of these things that are going to give me the result that I want. Now, I can see already I don't like this transition. It's too narrow. And essentially what happens is this line here, you have 0 impact from the edits. This line here is 100%, and then you have the breadth of this determines how smooth that transition is. So I'll probably drag this back up and try to spread that transition out over a little wider area. And I've probably overdone it, in particular with the exposure down to a full stop and a quarter. So I'll play around with these a little bit and find the sweet spot where I feel like, okay, I've got what I was looking for in the image when I took it. So we'll kind of leave that where that's at right there. I might want to get the blue a little bluer, and a way that I do that is through this HSL saturation. Use the color picker, which is this thing right here, so you can find a spot like the blue right there. If I want a little more saturation, just click in that area and push up a little bit, and boom, I've got me some blue to add into the sky to give it a little more color and a little more depth. So I'll keep that where it's at, and I think I want to go to the detail next and some sharpening. Again, I like the crunch. You can see here in the preview window there that even though that Omni Hotel is a long way off, there's a lot of detail in there, and I like that. The windows, the frames around them. Even take and drag this radius way up. Now, there's some issues that can come with doing that. You can overdo it as well. I'm going to leave it in this picture because I really like the way it looks like you could reach in and pick a blade of grass or pick a rock up off the shore, and I really like that. From a masking standpoint, if you hold down the Alt key and click on the mask, you get here what's showing you that the entire image is being sharpened and the radius being applied. So I typically drag this because really all I'm wanting to do is get very specific areas a lot sharper. One of the things that this is good for is if you have an area that you think that should be completely smooth. A good example might be a skin on a portrait or something, and you've gone through and you've tried to clean up and remove either scars or acne, just small imperfections. This tool right here, when working on a portrait, will show you things that you may have missed, and it's a good way to kind of clean up or finish cleaning up an image. It's not perfectly level. Now, we don't have a clear horizon line, but what I'll do, and I like wide images. I'll typically crop most of my images to 16:9 on the landscape side. And then right here, it may be difficult to tell or have a good vantage point for determining what's up and down. If you click on the rotation, though, you get the grid, obviously. And then, I just pick something that's near, for example, the tall tower, and just try to balance it out between the top and the bottom, and get that gap between the guideline and the building to be fairly accurate. And then the last thing to kind of decide is, do I want more reflection or do I want more sky? Do I want to center it? I'll center this one. It's a reflection. A lot of people do that. I don't always do it. Another thing that I'm not doing here is following exactly the rule of thirds, which might have me pull either this over to that line, shift the image, or get the tower, which maybe is a bigger point of interest. And in this case, I'm not going to do either of that. It's my choice, my image, so that's the direction I'm going to go. So pretty happy with that. If there was anything else that I might do to it, it feels to me like the highlights are still a little bright. So I might bring those down a bit. And there we go. And we'll go back and look at the original image. And then this is the final version this time around. And there's times when I've edited an image in multiple different ways. Each time I've gone through it and tried something different a little each time, and nothing wrong with that at all. So hopefully this was helpful to you. I used several different tools, but now you get a feeling of how I get to the look that I get from the images that I've taken.